Vivek, my friend, how are you, sir?
Good to talk to you, Glenn. How are you?
Very, very good. You are a guy who I think one of the few that actually really gets ESG and the Great Reset, believes and understands how dangerous it is, and is working to educate people and also help us beat it. Let me start with what's happening with ESG and BlackRock. Is BlackRock's downturn in their profits, is this something that is caused by ESG, or is this just the downturn of the market that everybody is feeling?
Well, the answer to that question, Glenn, is it is both of those things, in part because BlackRock is contributing to the downturn in the market that everyone is feeling because of ESG. So I'll explain to you how that works, where this is the largest asset manager in the world, managing over $10 trillion, around $10 trillion. It's about half the U.S. GDP in the hands of one firm. And if you add Vanguard and State Street to the list, the top three, they manage more than the U.S. GDP. And what they do is they're aggregating the money of everyday citizens. Probably most people listening to this program, actually. Probably you and me included. We don't know it through our 401k accounts, through pension fund accounts, et cetera. And what they do is they use that money to advocate for these ESG policies in corporate America. Climate change plans, emissions caps, diversity, equity, inclusion quota systems for race and gender on boards, et cetera. They use our money to advocate for those principles in corporate America that makes companies less successful. And as we've seen this year, has actually contributed to stock market declines as well, in my opinion. And the ESG specific funds this year, Glenn, have actually underperformed the broader market as a whole, even though the broader market as a whole has already done badly enough. And I think a big part of why the broader market has done badly is in part because of the demands of these ESG-linked asset managers. But the ESG-specific funds have done even worse. So the answer to your question is there a downturn because of the broader market, or is it because of the failures of ESG? The answer is both, because part of the reason the broader market is turning down is exactly because of some of these toxic policies that cause companies to focus on these orthogonal social agendas.
So let me ask you, because this, I'm not an investor guy. I should never be around money. I'm horrible at investing. However, it would be my feeling that if you are in a place to where oil is as scarce as it is, if we didn't have ESG, wouldn't the energy market be the place to put your money, or is that just a Glenn Beck, thought?
You know what? Well, it's not just Glenn Beck. It's Warren Buffett's quietly starting to behave this way too, Glenn. So you might give yourself a little bit more credit than you just did. But it's actually, if you think about it, this is the potential moment for U.S. energy to really shine and rise to the occasion, not just as an investment proposition, but as a proposition to meet the needs of Americans at a time when there's a massive supply-demand imbalance, right? I mean, you remember that as recently as 2018, the U.S. was the world's largest producer of energy. How quickly things have changed now with the U.S. president groveling in front of foreign dictators around the world, begging them to produce more oil that the U.S. could be producing instead. And now I know the Biden administration is trying to walk this back. I think a lot of ESG managers like BlackRock are trying to walk this back and say, well, we don't really want to end fossil fuel production. Actually, you know what this is done is he's making good on a campaign promise. In September of 2019, on the campaign trail, I'm quoting him exactly. Here's what President Biden, then candidate Biden, said. I guarantee you we're going to end fossil fuels, end quote. That was a campaign promise that he's now delivering on, but he has multiple tools to deliver on it, because normally the way constitutionally you would deliver on that campaign promise is that you would get a law passed through Congress. Well, he doesn't have the political support to do that. The American people haven't given Congress the political support to do that. Joe Manchin won't even stand in the way of won't even allow that to happen. And so what are they doing now? They're resorting to other means, like executive action through the climate change emergency. We'll hear more about what that means. They're doing it through the private sector, deputizing their cronies like BlackRock, many of whose alumni, by the way, work in the Biden administration, but large private sector actors. They do favors for them in return for those private actors doing through the back door what government could not get done through the front door through Congress, the constitutionally ordained way for actually passing laws. So he's delivering on that campaign promise, but doing it through the back door in ways that I think would make our founding fathers shudder if they actually knew the way the government was treating the private sector and using the invisible fist of government instead of the invisible hand of the market to actually reach these outcomes.
So one more question on food now. Would food be the same thing? Because we have the ability, we have the property, the land, we have the farmers, we have the history of being the world's breadbasket. If it wasn't for ESG, wouldn't this be the time that farming would be the best kind of investment where we would be selling our wheat and our food all over the world? We would literally be feeding the world if it wasn't for ESG. Am I wrong on that?
At a time when there's real demand and need for it as well. So the way I look at it going is these are all part of the same categories because energy is upstream of food production as well, right? It takes energy to transport food, to be able to export food, to be able to produce food, to be able to put the ingredients together for, so I agree with you. I kind of look at energy as even more fundamental because it's upstream of nearly every other sector and nearly every other production means. But the thing for people to understand here is that this is damage that's been done in the last few years by the merger of public power and private power. So that's what makes it so hard to find a source. Because on one hand, Biden can say, this isn't my fault. This is just the decisions of the private sector that stopped drilling for oil, that stopped drilling for that stopped fracking for natural gas. We didn't do that. There was no policy you could point to. But actually, the reason why they're doing it is because of the ESG movement in the private sector that this administration and the modern left supports through the back door. And so that's kind of how they're able to really trick the public through this jujitsu move, saying that, oh, this isn't us passing laws to do this. We're just seeing the private sector underinvest in oil and gas. That's what they say when gas prices are high, when in fact they were responsible for causing it. And that's what people need to wake up to.
All right, so they are not talking to the American people about this. They're blaming the private sector, and that usually means the investors and the companies. But the investors are not necessarily a part of this. A lot of us are invested in these companies through our 401k, et cetera, and we're not telling the companies to do this. Do the companies want to do this, or is it based just on the pressure from places like BlackRock, who have a lot of those shares because we run our money through BlackRock for our 401ks?
It's really the latter, Glenn. I'm telling you. So the U.S. energy sector, the potential of U.S. energy to be able to supply not only America's needs but the global needs is staggering. And this isn't just a policy failure; it's an American travesty when those same companies have been hamstrung from being able to do their jobs. Now, most people choose to work in the energy industry, for example, work in the energy industry because they want to be part of that solution. But what's happened in the last 4 or 5 years is that these large shareholders like BlackRock have imposed constraints on these companies. I'll give you a very specific example. Exxon, by the way, was the largest company in the world as recently as 2013. It's the largest U.S. energy company. BlackRock voted in favor of putting 3 dissident directors, 3 new directors that they put on the board of directors of Exxon to adjust its climate change strategy. And before BlackRock voted for those directors to join Exxon's board, Exxon had a business plan to increase oil production 25% between 2020 and 2025. After they put those new directors on Exxon's board, they revised their business plan to reduce oil production 20% over those same 5 years.
Wow.
That's a clear before and after. Now, imagine today how much more successful the American energy industry would be. Exxon would be as a company. How much lower gas prices would be if American oil companies were actually producing more oil, which was their prior business plan, before BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street too vote in favor of these new directors on the board, say, no, that doesn't match your climate change plans that we want to see you implement. Now you need to reduce oil production. This is the travesty, Glenn. It's the fraud of our time where Americans are paying for $5 gas at the pump with one hand, not knowing that their own 401k accounts and their own pension fund accounts and brokerage accounts are actually subsidizing the very ESG agenda that gives them $5 gas in the first place. And I think that once people start to see that with clear eyes, the good news is we find our way to a better way forward to say that we're not going to let someone else abuse my money, abuse my savings, to be able to send messages to the U.S. energy industry that I absolutely don't want to be delivering to the U.S. energy industry.
Well, that is...
Instead, I want them to make great products. That's actually what I think the next step in this battle looks like.
We have a ton of states now that are looking to move their money and, all of the pension funds and everything else. We have a lot of states that want to do that. We have a lot of people that want to do that. But I'm assuming this is what you're working on. I think you told us last time you were on that you were going to start something and go right after BlackRock. And
well,
is that happening?
This is why I started Strive earlier this year, creating a firm to compete head-on versus BlackRock, because these are problems, Glenn, created in the market that need to be solved through the market. And so that's why I started Strive, and we're going to take these guys head-on. And I've learned a lot over the last few months even about how broken that pension fund system at the state level really is. And this isn't even a Republican or a Democrat issue. We talk about, a lot of times people talk about the deep state and the federal government. I think it exists at the state level. I think it exists in corporate America, what I call deep corporate. But these are institutionalized, bureaucratized actors that, BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard, they've mastered this system over the last 10 to 20 years. And it's an ossified system that, in absence of everyday citizens speaking up and demanding change, you're going to have a mid-level bureaucrat who's going to happily sit and collect his paycheck without wanting to be bothered. That's going to say, well, this is what I've done, and I don't get paid anymore if I serve my citizens or not, so leave me alone. I'm overstating the case, but only by a little bit, which is exactly how many of these mid-level bureaucrats at the state level think and even communicate. And I think that at the end of the day, the right answer is going to come from everyday citizens demanding change. Kind of like what you saw on a small scale, the school boards last year, parents taking educational control back into their own hands, not leaving it to some sort of bureaucratized school board and saying that it's your job to educate my children. No, they're my children, and I have a say in how they're educated. It's the equivalent, I think bottom up, it's a sort of a positive revolution of sorts that we need to see that actually take everyday citizens to say that this is my hard-earned savings. I'm going to take control. It's just like it's my kids, it's my money. It's not your money, a pension fund bureaucrat, and it's definitely not your money, BlackRock. That's what we're going to have to see.
I think the same thing could be said for what we saw with Afghanistan. I mean, just this audience raised almost $50 million in like 3 weeks to go and save and rescue people from the Afghanistan debacle. We flew the last plane. This is the deal we had to make with the State Department, that we could get our people out if our first plane that flew out would carry our special forces. We're the ones that paid for that. I mean, it's incredible, but it is also a great example of what a group of people can do if they really set their mind to it. Vivek, hang on just for 1 minute. I have one more question for you. Vivek, earlier this week, I came back from vacation and I said the most important story since I've been gone was the Sri Lanka overthrow of the government and kicking out of the president, because the World Economic Forum said this is the model. And there was a story up at WEF.org that said, the headline was, how we're going to make Sri Lanka rich by 2025. So they implemented all of this stuff. They did everything the World Economic Forum said to do. And I talked about it and read that story on the air. By the time I got off the air, the World Economic Forum had taken that story off of their website. But do you agree that Sri Lanka is the example that we should all be looking at, saying they're the ones who did it, and look how it turned out?
I think it's a great example. Unfortunately, Glenn, I would love to say it is the example. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more examples by the day.
I mean,
I mean, look at what's happening in Ghana. Look at what's happening in the Netherlands. Look at what's happening in the United States and Canada at a smaller scale. We have an energy supply shortage that we just talked about in this country. But you're right, Sri Lanka is a great example to see what happens when these toxic philosophies are taken to their logical extent. And, I think that this is a transnational issue, Glenn. It is a transpartisan issue. It goes beyond partisan boundaries, national boundaries. It is a global monarchy, and it's going to take a revolution to fight it.
I agree. You're exactly right. Vivek, thank you so much. Be a part of that revolution because we're in one, whether you like it or not. And we don't need to pick up our guns. We need to inform ourselves and inform our neighbors. Knowledge is power.